Internal Audit, our dedicated Facebook Live series. Today's session is about internal audit report writing, and I will be joined by Sara I. James. Sara has a PhD, is a CIA, and is the owner of Getting Words to Work. She's also an internal auditor, writer, and editor. Sara delivers tailored in-house report writing training and consultancy to internal auditors and other teams across the globe, and has done so since 2006. Sara is currently working on a book on report writing, so look out for it early next year. So grab a tea and join me as we delve into report writing. So an introduction. Who am I? I'm Liz Sandwith. I'm the Chief Professional Practice Advisor at the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors, UK and Ireland. The Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors is the only professional body dedicated exclusively to training, supporting and representing internal auditors in the UK and Ireland. We have approximately 10,000 members in all sectors of the economy, all parts of the UK and Ireland. And our members are part of a global network of 200,000 members in 170 countries, all working to the same international standards and code of ethics. May I also remind you that you can acquire CPE points for these Talk to Internal Audit sessions. So don't forget to log them using our CPE template. Details of how to claim CPE from this live stream can be found in the comments section. So what are we looking at today? Well, today's topic is internal audit report writing, and is a practical hands-on session. And I'm sure you're going to love everything that Sara has to share with you. But let's stop for a moment and think about why we as internal audit write reports. If I asked you that question, what might you say? Some might answer that it's to communicate an engagement's objective, scope and results. Others might offer that it is to describe what the auditors found and make recommendations for improvement. But the ultimate objective of internal audit reporting is not to describe what we found or to make recommendations for improvement. It is to persuade the reader to take action. That's what we want our report to achieve. Remember, if you like Facebook streams and you want to spread the word, and I'm sure you do, be sure to share today's live stream. You can do that by clicking the share button in the corner of your screen. After all, the more the merrier. So can I just remind you, if you're just joining us, first of all, welcome to our live stream, Talk to Internal Audit. Today's session is about internal audit report writing and is very much a practical hands-on session with myself and Sara I. James, an internal auditor, writer and editor, and the owner of Getting Words to Work. Before I introduce our guest speaker for today, may I just remind you of the IIA standards that relate to internal audit communication, in effect, report writing. We've got standard 2400, communicating results. Internal auditors must communicate the results of engagements. 2410, criteria for communication. Communications must include the engagement's objective, scope, and results. 2420, the quality of communications. Communications must be accurate, objective, clear, concise, constructive, complete, and timely. There are different reasons for report writing: to present information, perhaps such as a laboratory report or a financial report, to present research findings, or to analyze a problem and then recommend a particular action or strategy. And I'm sure if we imagine for a moment what number 10 Downing Street must have been like over the last 18 months with the pandemic, I bet there have been research reports, laboratory reports, scientific reports, rushing around the place, helping people make decisions. A report can be long or short, formal or informal. The style and vocabulary choice will very much depend on who's going to read your report. So from an internal audit perspective, is this going to your audit committee, senior non-exec directors, or is this going to an operational line manager? There's a difference in the communication, perhaps. The level of their understanding or expertise might be one of the factors you will need to think about when you're putting your report together. Reports should be clear, concise, with the information presented logically in sections with headings and, if necessary, subheadings. Make it easy to read and understand, but lots more on that from Sarah. Impact is imperative, but not all internal auditors realise the difference that writing style can make to ensure corrective action is complete and timely. The content of a report informs readers, but writing style is what motivates. So there are some tricks that we can learn here, and Sarah, I'm certain, is going to offer us some tips. So without further ado, may I welcome Sara as our guest speaker. So my first question, Sara, during the pandemic, there has been lots of conversation around the importance of communicating promptly to stakeholders the key findings from an audit engagement. A number of CAEs moved quickly to one-page reports. What do you think are the benefits and potential downfalls of a shorter report?
Thank you, Liz. Great question. The first point to make, going back to the standards, is that nothing has ever stopped internal auditors from producing shorter reports. Most people prefer them, and indeed the standards emphasize concise. But I think corporate culture, fear of not including enough detail, even a degree of defensiveness, all encourage people to write too much, simply to show how much they've done. And it's really hard to change these kinds of habits. Often only massive external change, such as a pandemic, can prompt it to happen. So I welcome the shift to shorter, more concise communication in principle. However, what I've seen is some people taking some bad habits with them from longer to shorter reports. Shallow fieldwork, flawed logic, and over-reliance on what I'm going to call buzzwords. You can call it corporate speak, jargon, management speak, whatever you want to call it, are still apparent in some shorter reports. Now, on the plus side, the poor reader is suffering less. If you only have one page to plow through, that's better than plowing through 10 of this. But if the report is still missing opportunities to flag important problems, and as you were saying, encourage senior managers to address them, to take action, then it's still a waste of time and effort, even over just one page. And I've recently seen quite a few one-page reports where even in such a short space, it's apparent there's been no root cause analysis to identify common themes or trends. There's still too much detail and sometimes inconsistent messages. Now, I suspect it's often a case of condensing what had been the executive summary, which is often too long anyway, into one page. But often this happens without making sure the exec summary itself is doing its job, which is to give the headlines about the reviewed area's risk and control framework, not to simply recite what the team found. So unless people seriously examine what they have to convey and why, then however long or short the report is, they won't influence readers to take action to improve things.
That's really interesting, Sarah, and very much, as you said, along the lines that I had mentioned previously, and also along the lines of the standards. As you say, it doesn't say in there, thou shalt only produce one page, or thou shalt produce 28-page reports. it's about the communication piece. So as you've been very closely involved in internal audit report writing over a number of years, I'm absolutely certain you will have seen examples of reports, both good and bad. So what do you think are the common pitfalls that we as internal auditors fall into? And how do internal auditors change their bad habits into good habits?
Wow, where to start? Well, I think we need to start with the actual audit work. After all, when we are communicating something that we have done or doing or plan to do. So we're talking about our own actions. So if we go to the actual audit work, many times I've had to take time from the report writing training that I run, which covers aspects of auditing, to explain the basics to people. So it's a course for report writing, but I end up explaining what we mean by adequate and effective, to distinguishing risks from failed controls, to root cause analysis. So the fundamentals of audit work. And one client even said they scheduled my course before the Introduction to Internal Auditing course, I won't name the provider, because I gave attendees a solid grounding in plain language. They could then better understand what was covered in the introduction course. And this has happened even when they run their own internal introduction and methodology courses. I've also come across far too many chief audit executives in the past few years who admit that only at draft report review stage do they see how many assumptions and gaps are in the actual field work whose results are being reported as sufficient, reliable evidence. So again, this goes back to the basics of conducting an internal audit engagement. Now, assuming that internal audit has gone through the engagement properly, documenting it presents its own problems. And yes, I do say problems, not issues or challenges, because that's what plain language is all about. Now, I'm coming from this not just as an auditor, but as a specialist in language and languages. So lots of people are experienced internal auditors with strong views about their preferred style of writing. That's not unusual. But it helps my clients, I think, that I'm not just an auditor. I've been a professional writer and editor for 30 years now in 3 different countries, using 5 different languages in my professional life. And that brings a breadth of knowledge and experience beyond, well, this is what I think looks nice. If someone is advising you on writing skills, I think it's better for them to have some experience as a professional writer and ideally editor. Having said that, the principles of good, clear writing and plain language are pretty constant. And I'll share them now, but put them into an internal audit specific context so that hopefully they really come to life for everyone. So one mnemonic I've used for over 10 years now is one everyone understands and responds to, the ABCs. But in this case, each letter stands for a different principle of plain language, no matter what the writing. So we're talking about reports, but you can apply it to emails, terms of reference, interim memos, your field work, absolutely. The more you practice plain writing, the easier it is for you to recall and understand your own notes and documents and pull them together. So if you follow the ABCs, you shouldn't go far wrong. So I've used this in conference talks, articles, training, and it will of course feature in my book, Radical Reporting. It's really that simple and useful. So, okay, A stands for active, as in active rather than passive voice. Now this is about structuring the sentence so that the doer comes first, then the action, then the done to, the person or thing on the receiving end of the action. So the example I always use is the manager reviewed the report. So the manager is the doer. What did the manager do? Reviewed. What did he or she review? The report. In a passive sentence, you flip the word order around. So you start with the done to. The report was reviewed by the manager. Now, one important thing to point out, and apologies if this seems a bit grammar-y, but it's important, is we're talking about something called voice, which is not the same thing as tense. These are different grammatical terms. Tense is when things happen. Think about tense as being temporal, to do with time, past, present, or future. Now, often people confuse past tense with passive voice, and they'll say passive tense, which isn't accurate. But you can use voice, active or passive, in any tense. So the example I just gave is in a past tense. I'm not going to get more technical than that. So the manager reviewed the report. She did it in the past. The present version would be the manager reviews the report. That's active. Or the report is reviewed by the manager, would be the passive. If you put it into the future, again, you have a choice of active or passive. The manager will review the report, active, or the report will be reviewed by the manager. Again, I'm only pointing this out because loads of people talk about the active and passive voice and then get confused with actual tense when things happen. And more so if they're referring to active and passive tense, and then there's real tense. It just gets way more confused than it should be. So another point is that other languages than English have greater linguistic and cultural tolerance for the passive voice. So if I'm working with people on reports in, French or German, for instance, I enter into the linguistic and the cultural context there and explain how they can make their reports clearer and more readable, but within the setting of that language. But in English, and George Orwell is fantastic on this, it can be a problem. First, it makes the writing longer. All the passive voice versions I've just given are automatically longer than the active. But we'll come on to B for brief shortly. The real problem with the passive voice is it just makes it too easy to obscure who's doing something or where a problem sits. And this is especially true when you consider how often we leave the doer out of passive sentences. The report was reviewed. And a fun tip to spot the passive voice, doesn't always work, but usually does. If you can add the words by zombies to the end of it, it's usually passive. So the report was reviewed by zombies. Guess what? You've got the passive voice. Now, if it doesn't matter who reviewed the report, who performed the action, that's fine. But in internal audit, we usually need to know where controls sit, how many people or teams are involved, and where exactly the controls in question failed. It's not about pointing fingers, although many people fear this. I mean, if we think about it, it's usually sufficient to say that a particular team or department or senior managers didn't do X, didn't adhere to a control, didn't review the report. I mean, after all, our readers know that we reviewed controls in that particular team or department run by senior management. So why suddenly be coy and create a document full of mysterious actions with no apparent author or cause? It's ridiculous and very risky. It's risky because if we don't say which team is responsible for a particular control and fail to adhere to it, we're storing up trouble for the future. I've done follow-up on plenty of audits where I didn't write the report, I have to say. And the first line, the senior managers say, what? Were we supposed to do that? The recommendation just says that the server should be upgraded by zombies. So using the passive voice with no doer, no clue elsewhere in the immediate context will invite this kind of situation. But even before you get to that point, overusing the passive can obscure what's going on in your actual finding. So a very quick real life example, just again to turn the theoretical into the concrete for everyone watching, is an example from an IT audit report I saw a couple of years ago. And the findings started out really well with a good active sentence. It said the IT support team did not adhere to control A. And I thought, okay, I know what's going on. It then said controls B and C are not adhered to either. So I assumed that the writer was trying to be tactful, and rather than repeatedly blaming the IT support team, they left it to be understood that the support team didn't adhere to B or C either. And I kept reading, and all of a sudden the recommendations were just all over the place, made no sense. So I went back to the team who wrote it and I said, what's going on? And they said, well, the IT support team doesn't adhere to control A. Completely different team, mentioned nowhere in the report, doesn't adhere to control B. And that second mystery team relies on a third team, also unnamed, to perform Control C, so they can perform Control B. And I said, okay, why didn't you say that? Because we've got 3 distinct teams not adhering to 3 separate controls. And they said, it doesn't matter. I said, it absolutely matters. If you're telling me the IT support team does not adhere to controls A, B, or C, then I start to wonder about root cause. Is it within that team? Recruitment, training, management, comms. Something is going wrong in that team for them to get a group of controls wrong. If, however, you're telling me that 3 completely separate teams are each getting a control wrong, then maybe the problem lies elsewhere. Maybe it's in group comms, group policy, regulatory guidance. Maybe it's confusion about roles and responsibilities. It sounds like a governance piece to me. But you see how, in obscuring who was and wasn't doing things by using the passive, the team didn't allow this essential information to come through. So if there's one thing you focus on, it's master the difference between active and passive and be very aware of, how you're using them. Now, I know there are many internal auditors and even the occasional consultant advising on internal audit communications, all too ready to accept the passive because they say we don't want to cause upset. Now, as I said, passive is fine if the doer is irrelevant or 100% clear from the context. But just recently, I saw advice from someone saying that the active voice can sound like blame or be too harsh, and this seems to me overly cautious. More likely, it's an example of avoiding anything too difficult in life. Now, relying and over-relying on the passive is certainly the easy option, but it's an extremely risky and potentially unethical one. Overusing the passive is also the perfect way to obscure any gaps or assumptions in your own fieldwork, as well as to hinder the organization actually understanding and addressing the problems. And I don't think that's what internal audit is there to do. If someone can't bring themselves to do their fieldwork thoroughly and report objectively and clearly on what they found, how are they providing assurance? And so finally, this is also why passive voice is the go-to structure for anyone who wants to dodge responsibility. I mean, if we think of the classic line, mistakes were made, but lessons were learned by zombies, who wants to come across like that? This is Orwell's focus in warning people away from automatically using the passive voice. But it does exist and it can be useful. So a good rule of thumb for using it comes from author Rupert Morris, who says that 80 to 85% of writing in English should be active for maximum readability. Now, this still leaves you with up to 20% of your writing available for passive, so obviously there's no ban on it. Just a requirement for you to think very carefully about when and why you're using it. And if you're using it because everyone else does, or you think it sounds more impressive, or you simply don't have the nerve to state facts, there's a problem. B is for brief, so it means just keep your sentence short, ideally below 20 words. Beyond 20 words, you've probably crammed too much in and you're guaranteed to lose your reader, unless you've impeccably constructed and punctuated your sentence, which takes time and effort. If you doubt me, read some longer sentences out loud. Many people think they come across as more educated, professional, sophisticated, or whatever when they write really long, convoluted sentences, but they don't. As you'll see, if you try to read a really long sentence out loud, your attention will drift partway through. You'll be lost. And if you're doing the same in your writing, you'll lose your readers. The other thing is that basic errors such as typos, mispunctuations creep into and hide more easily within long sentences. So if you try to show off with a really long, fancy sentence, not only will you lose the reader, but you might risk coming across badly, which isn't ideal. So we've already got 2 metrics here. A maximum of 20 words in a sentence and 20% passive voice across an entire document. Again, this is in English. So that's easy to remember and easy to check. And both of these measurements are available in, for example, readability statistics such as Microsoft Word. If you haven't used these before, a quick search online will show you how to configure them in your Word documents, and just focus on those 2 stats. Ignore everything else in the pop-up box of readability statistics you get. If you can get both statistics, average number of words per sentence and passive voice across the document below 20, you'll have worked really hard, but you'll have made your document, your report, much more reader friendly. So the last thing, this is rather a long answer to your question, but I hope I'm covering the various aspects just as they occur to me. We're on the ABCs. The last part is C, concrete. So it's avoiding airy-fairy, vague, theoretical language. It's always better to paint pictures for readers of real people doing real things. And one way to do this is to favor verbs, so great action words, over a thing called nominalization. The language expert Brian Garner calls them zombie nouns or buried verbs, which I think is fantastic. You see zombies to the rescue again. All it means is it's when you take a lovely, simple, straightforward word, like let's say analyze, and you say we analyze the data, but you want to make it fancy, you want to make it impressive, so you start adding more syllables to fluff it up. So you might turn analyze, the verb, into analysis, the noun, a zombie noun. But you can't say we analysis the data, so you have to add more words. We performed an analysis of the data. But when you compare that to we analyze the data, what's the difference? You're using more words to convey the same meaning. So it's very easy to fall into the trap of adding more words that don't actually move the action forward. Now, in this example, we use the active voice and we start with the doer. So even if we say we performed an analysis of the data, active with a doer, we do have real people doing something. It's just wordy. Where nominalizations or zombie nouns lead to utter cotton wooliness is when you string them together in a grand overarching statement like completion, review, and retention of documentation facilitates verification and remediation. I'm sure it's all true, but first of all, I'm bored. And secondly, I'm none the wiser as who is supposed to be doing any of this. Is this a statement of grand principle? Is it a recommendation? If it's a recommendation, that's not very helpful. There are no actual people or teams linked to it. So again, can you take something like that with zombie nouns shuffling and groaning their way through that sentence and paint a picture of, real live people doing things? So you could say if team members complete, check, and keep their documents, it's easier for managers in turn to check and correct them. Yes, it's true, and it's much clearer. But when you get the massive sentences of those strung together zombie nouns, we don't get that. It's vague, abstract, woolly, anything but concrete. Which leads me on to one of my favorite topics, something else that clutters and obscures writing: jargon, buzzwords, corporate speak. Again, I'm still deciding which term to use. And the writer Molly Young calls it garbage language in an excellent article online. I think is it on Vulture? I can't remember. It's very insightful, very funny, a joy to read. So if you just do an online search of Molly Young, garbage language, you'll get the article. And her point's a valid one. So like garbage or rubbish, this kind of language is something that people create automatically every day. It piles up, looks bad, eventually it smells bad. And I've used remediation in an example above. It's a perfect piece of corporate speak. I always say that organizations with remediation programs never fix anything. Kind of sums it all up. And while people are wasting space and time using words like leverage or onboarding, readers and listeners will often go into a sort of boredom trance because it's the same limited yet vague wording they see and hear every day. And it just ends up washing over people. Now, it's great if your aim is to communicate in a way that turns your audience off and discourages them from looking too closely at what you're saying. It's also great if you don't know what you're saying, but you're trying to string together a bunch of corporate speak words and phrases to create an illusion of saying something. But if you actually want to communicate something meaningful to get people to do something, not so great. People alert to language have an inbuilt detector for the kind of corporate writing we see so much of. And this detector says, beware. The writer either doesn't know what they're doing and they're writing in a panic to produce something by a deadline, or they know exactly what's going on and are deliberately writing in this way to hide something unpalatable. And sadly, I've discovered that a surprising number of self-described communication experts and consultants seem to be oblivious to or intolerant of this kind of language, which implies they're either not alert to language or not willing to confront its consequences. So I think all of us as communicators, and certainly as auditors, we need to bring our professional skepticism to our and other people's use of language. Okay, that was probably longer than you wanted, but I think I covered several aspects.
Thank you ever so much, Sarah. That was absolutely great. And now you can just draw breath for a minute, because by Jove, you did cover a lot in that. But I love the ABC. It's letters that I use across a whole raft of different areas. So, you know, maybe if I'm talking about corporate governance, I will use ABC to reflect attitude, behavior, and consequences when people don't follow through with what they're supposed to do. So good use of 3 really key letters. So can I just say, if you're just joining us, welcome to our live stream. You've just missed a really crucial section from Sarah, so please press replay, go back and have another listen. Today we're looking at internal audit report writing, and it's very much a practical hands-on session with myself and Sara I. James, who's an internal auditor, a writer and editor. We have so far touched on common pitfalls in internal audit reporting, the pros and cons of a one-page report, and we're now going to look at how you can improve your report writing skills. So, Sarah, now you've caught breath, another question from me. How would you suggest we improve our report writing to ensure that we persuade the reader of the report to take action?
Oh, great question, and comes back again to the point of ever writing anything to get people to take action. By the way, I'm going to nick your use of the ABCs: attitude, behavior, consequences. That's fantastic. So how do we improve our report writing? Well, I'd refer to the points above. And first of all, going back to, I think, one of the earliest things I said, make sure you actually know what you're doing in an audit engagement. Make sure everyone knows what risk means, what risk-based internal auditing means, and why it matters. I wrote a top tips piece on writing about risk for the Institute. And it's still, I'm glad to say, on the technical guidance pages, along with loads of other invaluable advice and support and resources. It's crucial for us to understand and be able to articulate risk. And if you can't do that, then your findings won't come across as material. And your readers might not see them as anything other than housekeeping tasks. And this goes back to what I said about very often having to spend time in my courses explaining to people the difference between risks and failed controls. You know, if you write a finding that seems to articulate just some low-level day-to-day operational tasks, readers might not see the importance. But if you can link your finding to real, tangible, financial, reputational, regulatory, or other risks for the organization, they get it. And they see why it's in there and the organization's interest to take action. So writing, as Liz was saying, the writing style, writing clearly maximizes the chance readers will start reading, keep reading, and actually finish reading, and therefore take action. So remember, the more detail you cram in to persuade your reader of your expertise, the likelier you are to lose them. And this is really hard for internal auditors to follow this advice. We tend to be very thorough. We tend to be completists. We like to show, what good little auditors we've been and all the test results and how many people we've interviewed. It's overkill. It dilutes the value of the report. Get to the point and make it clearly and concisely. And this alone will actually help inspire confidence in your readers that your opinion is credible and useful. So actually, in writing less, you convey and persuade so much more.
Thank you for that, Sarah. That was really helpful. And I like the bit about making sure that, you are saying enough to convince the reader to take action. But this isn't a show and tell. This isn't, oh, look, this is all I've done. Aren't I good? It's about, as we said earlier, about convincing the reader to read and then act on what we are saying in our report. So thank you for that. That was really helpful. So finally, my last question to you is, do you have any tips to help internal auditors improve their report writing skills?
Absolutely, and a few I haven't mentioned previously, although I will come back to them. And I'm glad you're asking this. I'm in the zone because this is what I'm working on right now with the book. But until it appears, some tips that will apply to any piece of writing, but especially reports. I always advise planning rigorously first. I advise spending half the time you have allocated to writing a report, email, or whatever on detailed planning of exactly what you're going to include, in what order and why. So mind maps are great tools for chunky or complex engagements or benchmarking exercises. Basic outlines are always useful. And if you Google either of these things, mind maps or outlines, you'll find just a wealth of resources and examples that can help you experiment and find out what works best for you. But going to a basic outline, it's a way of gathering and ordering your info in a way that allows you to be confused and sloppy, work things out on the page before you write. And if you need to be really sloppy, then a mind map, lots of shapes and colors, just sprawling all over the page as you sort of think aloud on the page. Because when you do that, only then can you see things more clearly and gain insights. If under deadline pressure, you start typing straight into a report template without planning first, either using a mind map or an outline or any other technique, it leads to nothing but pain for the writer and the reader, and it makes the review process absolutely horrendous. So definitely work out ahead of time your content and structure. And if you do spend half your time on the planning, believe me, you'll spend a lot less time on the writing and the review will be a lot less painful. So yeah, you'll write less with more focus and confidence. And those one-page audit reports that are so in vogue right now and have the potential to be so useful, they're likelier to make more sense and deliver to senior decision makers and other managers exactly what they need to take action. Again, the basics of writing. I know Liz is a fan of the ABCs, as am I, obviously. Also, use spell check and grammar check, not least because they then enable the readability statistics. But also because I've seen far too many final reports, including some big name ones released to the press, with primary school level mistakes and typos, and this is just never a good look. Finally, read out loud, and this is a tip from professional writers across the globe. It's amazing how often you catch not only some spelling mistakes spell check won't catch, so if you've written colleges instead of colleagues, for instance, but repetition, logical leaps, circular reasoning. It's amazing how something that makes perfect sense when you read it silently, because you read what you expect to read, your brain fills in the gaps. You read it out loud and all of a sudden you see where maybe you need to go back, restructure, rethink, and rework. And finally, feel free to get in touch. Do have a look at my website, which I know the URL is going to appear in the chat button, where there are loads of articles about writing and reporting there. So plenty of resources for you to refer to, including my most recent piece published in Internal Auditor magazine. It recaps the ABCs and other points. So, if you want to have something printed out to hand in addition to replaying Talk to Internal Audit, these are good resources that can help you not just today but in the coming days, weeks, months, and years of your career as you hone your expertise as a writer and auditor.
Thank you ever so much, Sarah, for that. That was really helpful and reminded me back to my days of internal audit training. We had a superb lecturer. I was at the Civil Service College in those days, a gentleman called John Macmillan, and he said 3 tips he would give us always when writing reports. 1, plan. 2, write it in one session. Don't do a bit today, a bit tomorrow, and a bit the day after, because it reads like that. And 3, put it in a drawer or save it Leave it 24, 48 hours, depending on how much time you have. Come back to it, read it again. You will make changes. So I have tried very hard to follow those 1, 2, 3. And now I've got your ABC to add to those to help me improve my report writing. So huge thank you, Sarah.
I'm so pleased. I'm so pleased. And the reading out loud is perfect if you don't have time to put it in a drawer overnight.
Good point. Thank you. So theme reminder, if I may, if you're just joining us, welcome to our live stream, Talk to Internal Audit. Today's session was about internal audit report writing, a very much practical hands-on session with our guest speaker, Sara I. James, who's an internal auditor, writer and editor. I asked Sara various questions about pros and cons of internal audit report writing, and Sara has some brilliant tips to offer in response to my questions, including how to improve your internal audit report writing skills. So may I say a huge thank you to Sara for joining me today and for sharing her thoughts with us all. Lots for us to reflect upon and perhaps share with our internal audit colleagues, or indeed share the video with them and they can listen to Sara themselves. Because it's worth taking on board, and it's really important that we get our report writing skills honed to the very best that we can, because remember what I said at the beginning, sorry, not at the end. What is important is making sure that we get action from our work. So that's really important. The live stream is available afterwards for those of your friends, colleagues, family, who may have missed the live version on the Institute's Facebook channel. I want you to also follow all the other exciting things the Institute is doing on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. We have a real presence, so please join us, follow us, and learn from all we are sharing with you. As a member, you have access to the latest edition of our Audit and Risk magazine, which will be available on our website from the 8th of July. And this month we are looking at disruption. So there are some articles around disruption. We're also looking at external quality assessments, and there are some report data in relation to the external quality assessments the Institute has done over the last 12 months. We also have a range of courses, including one on report writing, and that is an introduction to audit report writing and shows you how to produce reports that have impact and add real value to your organizations. Details of how to book this course can be found in the comments section of this video. In case you've not already checked it out, the Institute now has a brand new community hub for all of you to get involved in. A new gateway to all community-focused activities and endeavors, including our virtual forums, regional networks, and volunteering opportunities. There you'll find a list of all our special interest groups. So if there's any that pique your interest, reach out. Our community hub is open to all, members and non-members, and draws on our learnings from the COVID-19 period. So watch this space as it continues to take shape over the coming months. As we move into the future, please don't forget to look out for Talk to Internal Audit. All of the live streams that we did in 2020 can be found on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't yet watched any, be sure to subscribe. A link to our YouTube channel can be found in the comments section. We will continue to share with you our thoughts regarding specific challenges, along with input from colleagues, members, and guests. So please stay in touch. And don't forget that you can pick up CPE from this as well. So lots of really positive reasons for going back and looking at the previous YouTube sessions that we've done. We have another another Talk to Internal Audit session in July, which will focus on auditing supply chain management, a key challenge for organizations and for internal auditors as we move forward into the next phase of the new norm. Look out for it and please join us. If you have any specific topics you would like us to cover, Please share your thoughts in the comments box. And remember, I'm always happy to take questions via email at liz.sandwith@iia.org.uk. Remember, talk to Internal Audit because the Institute is listening. Thank you and stay safe.